So at this stage, we will open up our recaps of the small group discussions. If needed at the end, and most of what remained the presentations was really on my end, and I'll just incorporate what would have been discussed in those themes in my recap. And we have a full, during my small group at least, went through what those slides would have been, and they'll be posted. But would anybody else who would like to volunteer to start off providing from the DCA small group facilitators and leads, opening up with a recap, salient points from your discussions, and then people can ask questions and comment in the full group on these topics.
I can go.
Thank you.
So I had the policy initiatives in scoring group, and there were two main topics that we talked about. One being the option C of quality education areas. The other is stable communities and the census data underlying option B. We also had a few other smaller things mentioned, but I'm going to focus on the two main things. So the first, for quality education areas, there was some confusion and different ways of interpreting what the QAP said in absence of the instructions and data workbook, resulting in some people getting different numbers for their calculations for that top 75% threshold for the second condition. Just wanted to make sure I caught that. So we have asked everyone to submit through Q&A, both if you think there are discrepancies in the data, in the way that things are calculated, or if you just had a different interpretation. We would love all of that feedback because we want to understand the implications of all of this. So just want to reiterate, please submit any and everything through Q&A. Nothing is a stupid question. Okay, so for stable communities, you may have noticed that we posted the stable communities data workbook yesterday, and it only has 2019 ACS data in there, and that is because the Census Bureau had to push off their release of the 2020 5-year ACS data until next month. And so we have only posted 2019 and plan to update by adding 2020 if it is posted before app submission. We did have some confusion though. Some people had started to do calculations based on 2018 and 2019 data and did not realize that we would not be considering 2018 data. So again, please submit through Q&A what your interpretation is and what the implications are so that we can, evaluate all of these. A couple other small things were concern about diversity of allocation in rural areas and the previous project's map. So we have been working on correcting locations on some of the properties on the map that we have been told are mapped in the wrong place. So we have been researching and trying to rectify those. However, there are some properties which will appear to be in an unincorporated area. However, if you go to the funding list on the website, the select list, it will show that it's within the city limits. And this is because the coordinates, usually the site entrance, is outside of the city boundaries, but most of the property lies within the city boundaries. So it's still within city limits. And we did not think it was appropriate for us to manually alter the location of these properties from what the applicants had put into their application and gave us. So just encourage you to use the map as a reference, but always go and check the select list to ensure that you have the correct information about location, specifically whether it's within the city limits or not, because that will have the most accurate information. And that's pretty much it for my group.
I can go next with the federal compliance group. So a lot of the questions had to do with environmental reviews, which was not unexpected. And I thought with my notes, rather than go into the specifics about the environmental requirements, I'll just give you a list of tips to help you with your application with environmental. So one of the things we are always disappointed to see is when people have missing documents or missing signatures in their environmental review, because that would make that we can't ask for that after the fact. So please be sure you have those in there and you follow the list of documents and make sure you check that you have all the signatures on everything. And then also timing. We had a number of questions having to do with when testing for certain things has to be done. So for example, if you put in an application last year for 9% round and you have the same site and nothing's changed, some of those things you don't have to retest. You don't maybe have to do soil testing, for example, or noise testing if it's less than 12 months. So please be sure to check through the document, because each specific requirement has a time frame for when it's valid for, and then contingencies on whether the site itself has changed or the neighboring sites have changed, whether or not you have to retest it. So you can maybe save yourself some time and money with that. And then we put the manuals and forms up on the website. So thank you to Stephen Barrett for that. So that's available right now for you to review. Some issues about historic preservation. So you may not know that the Historic Preservation Office moved over to DCA, which is really helpful for us to collaborate with them on a lot of our projects. And one thing we've learned is that they review every request that you put in. So last year, when we realized we were reviewing everyone's application, their historic preservation documents, even though we weren't funding every application, we decided to help them out by telling them when we make awards, that they can go ahead and proceed with reviewing your applications. And we know that it takes time. It takes 30 days for them to review it at first, and then another maybe 60 days. If they have to go back and forth with you, it could be another 90 days or sometimes longer. But we feel there's enough time built into our system so that if we make awards and they start reviewing your documents, you should have a resolution from SHPO before you need to do anything on site. And that being said, also, there are things you can proceed with depending on what the Historic Preservation Office needs you to do. So it's really a case-by-case thing, and we can work with you to figure out your plan so that you can proceed with what you can and not be in violation of any requirements that SHPO may have for you, the State Historic Preservation may have for you. Another thing too about timing is with regards to wetlands. So if you're building a phase development, or if you're doing scattered site and you're applying for the first phase, but the wetland or the stream, the creek, the state water, what have you, is on a different part of your site, but that's all part of your legal description of your site plan. You do need to address all of those things in the first phase. So you would have to have your plan for the permanent covenants and the site drainage and erosion plan in place for that first part, even if that's not really affecting the stream until later on. And I think that's enough tips for us from environmental. We did cover a lot of specific things about wetlands and noise and lead paint and historic preservations. Oh, one more thing about historic preservation too. We recently had an issue with HUD where the developer had sent letters to the tribes for consultation, which was very nice that the developer did that, but we had to go and redo it. So HUD doesn't acknowledge anytime that a developer or a non-government entity contacts the tribal governments on behalf of us. So we're the only ones who are able to do it. So if you do it, that's nice, but we'll have to redo it. So save yourself some time and don't contact the tribes for you. Let us do it for you. And that's all the tips I had for environmentals. Well, really, we didn't discuss any of the other federal compliance things besides environmental, but those are the tips for you.
I can provide an update from the compliance and asset management small group. So we discussed 3 scoring sections: desirable and undesirable amenities, community transportation, and compliance performance. Can you guys hear me okay? I just got a message that my network quality is bad, but okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. Good. So to start with, on compliance performance, we first talked about something that we saw last year a little bit and just wanted to clarify. And that really is the recommendation for all applicants to include their full list of successful Georgia properties that you currently own. Even if you think you will not be assessed any point deductions in the compliance performance section, it really can't hurt you to add your full list of properties. It can only help you. And further, we wanted to remind everyone that during the qualification determination process, if you receive a waiver for a significant adverse event, that significant adverse event is still going to be included in the point deductions in the compliance performance section. So I think there was some confusion last year where some applicants thought a waiver during QD, so it wouldn't be included in the point deductions, but the QAP clearly states that any significant adverse events that you receive a waiver for will count as negative points in the compliance performance section. For community transportation and desirable, undesirable, we talked about just being really careful with the geo coordinates that you put into the application or for desirables, putting into your certification form. That's what DCA uses. We often see some typos or where you switch the latitude and longitude. So please pay attention to that and make sure you put in the proper coordinates there. And then we had some questions specific to undesirable amenities, kind of wondering about DCA's analysis of that. So we talked about the fact that this section is done somewhat in conjunction with the market studies section. So we do cross-reference to ensure that the market study doesn't identify any undesirable items that were then not included on the undesirable certification. So please do make sure to list all items you are certifying that information. And then we talked about if there are undesirable amenities near the site, the QAP does outline ways in which you can submit proof to us that mitigation of that undesirable amenity will occur. And there are 2 different sets of dates based on who is performing that mitigation. And then the last part of desirable that we talked about is just clarifying that the desirable points are capped at 20. You can include more desirable amenities that put you over 20, but you will only receive a maximum of 20. And then if you do have undesirable amenities, the deductions will come from that 20 points. The deduction does not come from if you say that you have enough desirable amenities for, say, 25 points worth. The deductions will come out of the 20-point maximum. So that's it for our group.
Okay, I can go ahead and go over the relocation portion. We went ahead and had the forms put up on the website. So again, I echo Sam and thank you, Stephen, for doing that for us. We started out with a question regarding resyndication of a property with a good portion of market rate units and what that looks like with permanent displacement. And so the essentially what we came down to is since that tends to change, okay, I'm getting texts while we're talking from an IM here. So with regards to permanent displacement, if you go ahead and anticipate someone will be permanently displaced, it is, if you'd like to go ahead and put in a waiver for that, just to make sure that's fine. However, because income does happen to change and there's a good chance that the individuals will qualify for the development, as long as contingency is put in place and there is honest communication around the status of those particular individuals in the relocation plan, that that we know that that is something that will be reviewed later on in the application when people are moving into the location. So you can go ahead and make sure that that's put in the relocation plan, and it can also be put up for a conditional pass if it comes down to that. We went over the additional relocation tab and the dates for the GIN, and so 15 days prior to application, the general information notice is to be submitted to all of the tenants on site regarding your application. And so please be sure to do that and submit us a draft of the GIN with the pre-application. We also had a situation as far as the placement of individuals from one housing authority into their permanent location. So the application was going to be put in for a place where there's only a few families living, but that is the temporary site and they're moving into their permanent site. And so again, open communication with us regarding that. With whatever the situation is, please just let us know ahead of time, and you can go ahead and do that in the Occupied Development tab with your application. And as far as the waiver, Miranda, did you want to go ahead and talk about the waiver for us?
No, you already, I think you started off talking about the waiver.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So I think we're good. Thank you so much.
Just really quick, I did get a message asking for a clarification about what I said previously about Q&A. So we will open our official competitive round Q&A sometime after this meeting. And that is what I'm talking about. So if you have any questions, concerns, find any discrepancies, have a certain interpretation, anything, please submit it through the Q&A. It will be posted on the DCA website on the 2022 Qualified Allocation Plan and Related Documents page, where you also found all of the draft documents and the information to access this meeting. So that is what I'm talking about, and we really, really encourage you to submit any and everything through Q&A, please. Thank you.
And just to elaborate on that point, I'll have a couple of talking points referring to that when it comes around to me. But you all may notice that under the or above the documents, which would be more when we send the email blast associated with it, it will be more self-evident. It says open for public comment. So we are putting a public comment period out specifically because, especially say with respect to the, education and previous projects, for the education data, we do feel, I won't go down the rabbit hole, but we could understand how a different methodology for calculating one of those percentiles could be arrived at. So we are, open to that dialogue, and that's why it's a public comment period. So send us your methodology, and we have and will continue to share ours, and finalize a product as such. The other one with the previous projects one is that a year ago, that's when we were first notified that some of the geo coordinates were wrong for previous projects, and that was because that's what's in the application. So the data that's mapped is just application data that goes to directly to the team. So we requested people to submit wrong coordinates to us so that we could correct it. And if I remember correctly, we received 0 corrections. So it's the same map. What's different this year is Megan has done some spatial analysis to try to identify the errors that people did not want to share with us previously. So it is up for public comment, and any corrections that you put forth or statements on methodology, et cetera, would be considered during this public comment period. That's why we put it up. So with that, I will step back, and we can certainly do questions on the topics. You can also, I don't think there's been any questions for small group recap. We can feel free to engage and pose a question or make statements along the way rather than waiting for everyone to be done.
I will jump in and present some of the topics that we discussed within the director's office. There were, I guess, categories, and one of course, the big categories was diversity, equity, and inclusion, and those points. So, as you all know, with anything policy related, it is a moving target. It is very rare that we hit the bullseye the very first year out of the gate. This is our first year. There will be several iterations in the years to come, I suspect. And with that, I will also say inviting more people to have a seat at the table is only the first step. DCA recognizes that. The second part of this will be will address capacity building. I do not anticipate that DCA will train and do capacity building, but there are a ton of grants available nowadays. There's a lot of money kind of flooding the marketplace for nonprofits and groups, especially from HUD, teaching capacity building. So that will be the second part of this dialogue. When we first pitched the very first draft related to MEBI Weeby, we received a lot of feedback and comments, and we had several internal conversations on how to fix this language. So we ended up equalizing the points for both sections, and we wanted to make a pathway for anybody that agrees that this is an issue and wants to play a part in moving the needle. We have a pathway for you, and the points to that in those pathways are equal. DCA is not certifying any entities. That is not a burden that we want to bear. So Denise updated the form, which is on the website. I'll share my screen quickly. You may have seen this in the past or maybe not, but it is live now. Let's see here. Oh, here it is. And Jack, we can probably post it in this chat, but also it is on the website right now. But this is just our engagement policy. It tells you who the certifying entities or agencies are, as well as the NAICS codes that we are recognizing this year. So there's a lot of information here that might be helpful, and you'll see that we did, the version I have up does not show that the points are the same, but they actually are in the QAP. So DCA is not certifying any of the entities. If you want to get certified, you can go to the Department of Administrative Services, DOAS, that's another state agency, the Georgia Department of Transportation, GDOT, or you can go to one of the national councils that certifies for MEBI Weeby businesses. When you go to that website, they will direct you to a local chapter, and the local chapter will give you a process and their requirements for getting certified. Anybody else from that call? Did I leave anything out? We did have a few questions about whether or not nonprofits can be eligible. And to my knowledge, no, none of those organizations certify nonprofits as women-owned or minority-owned organizations or enterprises. Thank you, Denise.
Sorry. Yeah, like Jill said, the points have been equalized. So if you're a nonprofit, you just can't get points for subsection B, but you can still get them for subsection A. So like Jill said, if you recognize that this is an issue and want to address it and claim the points in one of them, you can. So were there any other points on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, Jill? Or
no, but we have started talking about how we will run compliance on this. If somebody opts to use a certain amount of vendors or professionals in pursuit of this section, how we will score this down the road if people do not honor their commitment or say they couldn't find somebody eligible. And to that point, all of those certifying agencies have a way for you to search for vendors based upon the NAICS codes. So if you're looking for a minority-owned or woman-owned plumbing company, you can go to any of those websites to find eligible vendors. Donna, Denise, did I leave anything out?
Not that I could think of. That was pretty inclusive.
And then some other things that we talked about in that director session. Specifically, we had a lot of questions related to the 4% round, what that's going to look like. The short answer is we don't really know what that's going to look like. There are a lot of things that we're still discussing internally. Jack, someone had the idea, and I think I saw a question about this as well, that there should be a separate QAP workshop for 4%, which may not be a bad idea, especially if it's scored in different ways. So that was a comment I've seen a couple times now.
Mitch, before you move from that, I think the sentiment is wanting to make sure people understand how scoring will work for 4% whenever it becomes a thing. And then secondly, making sure we provide sufficient notice before we do a NOFA or a competitive process so that people can secure sites, work on applications, pre-applications, etc.
Just some other things about 4%. Someone brought up that as we go into the 9% and 4% competitive rounds, it'd be helpful to get an updated list of addresses for 4% deals that we have received so far. We are reluctant to really post a full list of applications until we complete the cycle. So as we said earlier, there's still 14 applications that we have yet to receive. But if you would like a list of the addresses, we can make that available for you. We have that, or we have it at least for a majority of the 4% deals that we've received so far. So if that'd be helpful for you, let me know. And then lastly, the 4% timeline. I think we said it earlier as well. But best case scenario, if we can get through all of our pipeline of allocation, which is kind of dependent on the fact if there's an economic development deal or a big flexible pool deal. Hopefully we can get through it by the end of the year, and then hopefully we can take in new competitive 4% applications either in 2020 or Q4 or Q1 of 2023. So those are all my updates on. Or also, one thing I will say, we didn't talk about this during that session. For QD or qualification determination, which Grace mentioned a few minutes ago, if you can, please do that at pre-app. You're not going to be penalized if you miss anything or don't submit a performance workbook, whereas you will be if you don't submit a performance workbook that is required if you do it at full application. So please submit QD stuff at pre-app.
Okay, I will give a recap of the feasibility underwriting section. We didn't have a whole lot of underwriting changes in the QAPs, but we did have some questions about some things that relates to what we do every day. And one of them was about the home funds and if we were going to utilize those in the 9% round. And unfortunately, we are not. And I think someone mentioned that there's a survey that's going to go out about the utilization of those funds. Bond review time to get an LOD. It's really dependent upon this, the application when it gets in, if we have a lot of clarifications, if a lot of missing things were not included in the application. So that we have a 75 to 90-day review time, but sometimes it can be longer for someone to get an LOD, just depending on if the application is complete or not. And there was also a question about waivers and if they're going to use a third party or energy consumption model for their utility allowances, does that need to be included with in the application? And I told them yes. we will definitely need that. And as it relates to underwriting waiver, someone wanted to know how complete the application needs to be, and as complete as possible. During the waiver process, we do have a little bit more autonomy to ask questions, but just so that we can complete all of the reviews in a timely manner, we just ask that you submit everything as complete as possible. And that's all I have.
I'll go next. So for the construction session, we didn't have a lot of questions, or as many questions as I thought. A lot of them were really based on some of the rehab work scope and P&A that we kind of led with in the all attendance open session. So I think the main concern was the ability to be able to submit the pre-app waivers if applicable, and then have any type of communication or dialogue of what's needed if something additional is needed, and not just a declined waiver getting back. And hopefully I was able to answer that for everybody, but just to reiterate, on top of what Sandy was stating earlier, in our pre-app process, we do have more communication and dialogue that we can actually go back and forth. So if you're submitting your waiver and we see that additional documentation is needed, or if we see that we don't have, or if we see that we have everything that we need, we can always communicate with you. And I think that was a big concern, especially when it comes to the P&A and not having the ability and not having a really big lead time when it comes to getting the information needed. There was also the option, or at least some feedback, of maybe submitting an older P&A. I definitely said if it speaks to everything that we need on the waiver that you are requesting, and it's not a P&A that is so old where there has been some significant changes, and we can get some type of narrative affidavit statement from your P&A consultant stating no big changes, that's also something that we're more than happy in order to discuss. Just making sure that we're not bringing it to a full policy, and more so of a case-by-case basis, and why we would discuss that in the actual waiver review submission, in the actual waiver review process. So hopefully that alleviated a lot of concerns by requesting that rehab scope of work and that P&A, and that during the pre-app process, we do have more ability to actually communicate with you, and we're just making sure you know all of the documents that will be needed. If we see that's not the case in your waiver request, again, that just allows us to do a very fast and more speedy review for you. And the same thing was regarding the rehab scope of work. Main concern, of course, having actual numbers that far ahead. Again, it's mostly to talk to if there's any waiver request on feasibility, infeasible type of making the project infeasible, or those are mainly the phrases I hear when you're submitting your waiver request. So of course, if you're stating any type of feasibility of a waiver request and causing the project not to be feasible, we need to see that cost documentation with it. So that's why we're asking for that rehab scope of work. Again, pre-app process, we are able to actually communicate with you. So if we see that we need more documentation, or the documentation